Okay, so it is 11 o'clock, which means we can get started. So in the chat box we have, can anyone confirm that they can see my screen? It should have the StockTrak logo, personal budgeting game text listed on it. Okay, perfect. So let's get right into it then. So StockTrak has been working for the last year or more to develop our new personal budgeting game. I'm going to talk about what it means, how it's used, how it can be used in classes, and a little bit more. So to get started, my name is Kevin Smith. I'm the StockTrak Director of Product Development. I'm also joined on this call by Thomas Reddy and Anthony Ponzo, who work with me. They're both part of our sales team. Tom Reddy is our Director of Global Education, and Anthony Ponzo focuses more on the new personal finance side. So, as we get into what we're talking about here, StockTrak has developed a new personal budgeting game. In this game, it's designed for financial literacy and personal finance classes. It works alongside our stock game, and it has a new and improved curriculum library that they all work together for a new enhanced experience for personal finance classes. So in the budgeting game itself, students are challenged to manage a budget for a simulated year. So they need to balance their income, their bills, their credit card, their unexpected expenses, and their time to successfully fulfill the game's objectives. Nearly every element of the game is fully customizable for your class. So just to give you a little bit of idea of how it actually works, this is the budget game itself. You can see here that the game board is a calendar. So as the student progresses through time by rolling the dice, they have bills that come up that they need to pay. So you can see here, I have a bill reminder here that I have to get paid, which is flashing it's a cell phone bill. I have my health insurance bill, I have grocery bills, all kinds of bills come up through the game. And as I roll the dice to move forward, let's give it a second, it's been a while since I had this page loaded, I'm hit with a bunch of other unexpected expenses. So this is a pretty small one, it's pretty easy to manage, but they can get pretty big ones too. A rear axle in your car breaks, or your parents are inviting you home for an anniversary dinner, things like that. For every expense the students have in the game, they can use their debit card, so to take money directly from their checking account, or their credit card, which goes against their credit limit. So in this case, I'm going to use my debit card, and you can see as I go through the game, I need to make sure my bills get paid on time. If I don't, I encounter late fees. So again, with most bills, I can use my debit or credit card. Basically, using my credit card. And as more progress goes through, the act of managing the bills gets coupled with trying to build up their savings balance, so transferring money from their checking account to their savings account regularly to build up an emergency fund. Let's transfer a little bit of money here now. I can see my savings ratio has changed. And there's several other game objectives that I'll get into in a second. So in the budgeting game, as the students play through, there's 4 main objectives which add up to the end game score. So first and foremost is savings goals. Students are prompted consistently throughout the month to transfer money from their checking account to their savings account. We use a pay-yourself-first model where the students get the most money by consistently, every month, saving 10% of their income regardless of their expenses. Which means they need to balance their bills, they need to balance their spending, they need to balance their credit card usage to make sure they can hit those savings goals each month. That is the single biggest component of the end game score. The second is the students need to build up their credit score. So credit score is built up by students using their credit card responsibly. Now you can see in the game here, I have a credit card outstanding balance of $80. I have currently a $500 credit limit. Every month, every time I make my first credit card payment, my credit score will go up because I'm making payments on my credit card. I get more points if I fully pay off my credit score at the end, or my credit card at the end of each month. However, my credit score goes down if I start using too much credit. So if I use more than 50% of my available credit at any given time, I start losing points in my credit score. And then to bring it all together, as my credit score increases, my credit limit increases because I'm shown to be more worthy of credit. So every time you increase your credit score by 100 points, then your credit limit goes up by another $250 or $500 as they get farther into the game. So using the credit card responsibly gets easier through the game so long as they're actually consistently using it responsibly. If they're always going right up near their credit limit, that's going to be very difficult for them to improve their credit score and improve their credit limit for that matter. The next step is quality of life. So quality of life is a score that is unique to our budgeting game. I've never seen it anywhere else out there, and this is the metric that kind of sets everything else apart. As the students go through the game, they have a lot of different options they can take in terms of how to actually build up their quality of life. So for example, when they start the game, they're prompted, where do you want to live? A small studio apartment, a one-bedroom apartment, a two-bedroom apartment. They might want to take the cheaper options for every option they get, just so it makes them easier to hit their savings goals. They increase their net worth faster because they're just never spending any money. But at the end of the day, that's not how it works in the real world. Taking the smallest, cheapest thing you can for every option is not going to be a way that most people really want to live. So by taking these higher options, their quality of life will increase every month when they have to pay their rent. The same goes for when I'm actually playing through the game, and I have options that I can choose one or another. Let me see if I get lucky and get one right away here. Yeah, right here. So it's being asked if I want to schedule a dental cleaning. So I can skip it and save some money, but actually taking it is going to improve my quality of life. It's a much stronger way to just generally have a higher quality of life overall, which goes into this quality of life score, which in turn goes into the game score. So all of these things work together to give the game score. The last major thing we keep track of is net worth, so assets minus liabilities. When students have bills issued, that counts against them. When they have a credit card balance, that counts against their net worth. So you can see here, my checking and savings balance together is about $600 or so. But I have an outstanding credit card balance, I have outstanding health insurance bills I haven't paid, so my net worth is actually is quite low. So understanding how those work together is another key metric in the game. Now, one important thing is that net worth in our game doesn't actually figure into the game score. Students build their game score by hitting their savings goals, so setting and hitting realistic savings targets, using their credit card responsibly and building up their credit score, and building their quality of life. A lot of the events throughout this game are somewhat random. So we have a library of over 600 events that can happen, which means students aren't necessarily going to be getting the same events. So when we talk about things like class rankings, it's not quite fair to show it just by net worth, although students can sort it by net worth just in case they're curious. Instead, we use this aggregated game score, which is a level playing field for everybody. Regardless of how much income or expenses they have, if they're able to manage it and hit their savings goals, that's the number one way to build up their game scores. So, because we did not design the game exactly, we know exactly how to win it. So, in the game itself, the dominant strategy in order is save early and save often. Set at least a 10% savings goal every month and hit it. So if I go back to my game here, at the beginning of every month, students have to build their monthly budget. So to do this, first I look at the income I'm going to earn this week. So it's going to tell me all the paychecks I'm expecting to earn and how much. I'll be earning $800 with 4 paychecks, $3,200. Minus their income tax, so we actually show them what their take-home is going to be, and then when they receive their paychecks each week, we actually do show them a full pay stub with a breakdown of where all their money is going. Next, we show them all their expenses they're expected to get. So all the bills that are set for your class, you'll see how much they're expected to pay. This last item down here, estimate your other expenses, is a tricky one, because this is, at the end of the day, where most budgets in the real world fail. Everybody can look at their list of bills and add them up and understand how much money they need to set aside for that. But where always the failure point is for the other unexpected expenses. So for the first month or two of the game, this is going to be a guess for students. They might think $150 or $200 or something, but they'll always be able to see how much they spent on that amount last month. So as the game goes on, they get better and better at actually estimating how much money do I really spend on other things. And that makes it much easier for them to understand how to hit their savings goals. And then finally, they actually need to set down and write down a savings goal. So they see how much income they're expected to make, they see what their expenses are going to be, they see their expected surplus or shortfall, and we tell them you need to set a savings goal. And as I said before, we use a pay-yourself-first model, which means that setting a savings goal should be 10% of your income. You just see your expected surplus or shortfall just so you understand how easy or hard it's going to be to actually hit that. So I'm expected to earn $2,800, so I want to save at least $290 this month. A 10% savings goal. That's way less than my expected surplus, so this is going to be quite easy target for me to hit. There can be months where the students think they're going to have a lot more unexpected expenses. So if I say I have a $600 target, for example, it's going to be quite hard to hit that, but I'm saving 20% of my income, so I don't really need to do that. So after they set their savings goal, they would start the month, and then they have until the end of this month to hit that goal. On hitting that goal, they get a huge boost of their game score. They also get a huge boost of their game score by hitting their by funding their emergency fund. So, for example, when I transfer money, if I transfer $500, that's the first milestone for an emergency fund. And I got a huge boost of game score just because I saved my first $500. When they save a whole $1,000, they get another huge boost to their game score. So that goes even more. I get another boost to my game score. But now I have almost no money in my checking account, so I can't really maintain that. And as I transfer money out, I lose game score points because it means I didn't plan very well. So second factor is using your credit card. Every time a student increases their credit score, their game score goes up 5-fold. So an increase of 20 credit score points, for example, gives me 100 points to my game score. So that's another major component. And third and least component of the overall game score is spending the money. So the quality of life is important, but the way points are distributed is modeled such that you will maximize your game score by spending money only once you've saved 10% once you've hit your 10% savings goals. If you don't hit that 10% goal, your spending extra money doesn't help you in any way. This also means that a student who is going to do the very best in the game is, in the very first 2 months, put almost all of their money into their emergency fund. So get that emergency fund cushion built up. Once they have that cushion, then they would scale down their savings to the point where they're saving their 10%, and they're actually spending some money on consumption and building their quality of life. And all throughout, of course, maintaining a good credit usage. We also have a time management component. So at the end of each week in the budgeting game, the students are asked how they want to spend the weekend. They have 4 options. They can do a side hustle, work some extra hours and earn some extra cash. They can socialize with their friends. They can work on their household chores, or they can conduct professional development. So working extra hours, it's straightforward. You work extra hours, and then on your next paycheck, you'll get a bonus on it based on how you did in a little mini game that we launch. Socializing, these events that pop up usually have you spending some amount of money, but they're among the most effective ways to build the quality of life throughout the game. $1 spent in socializing is worth about $3 or $4 that you would spend on rent, for example, for the same kind of event. Household chores, this is things that would be saving money. So spending time clipping coupons, renegotiating cell phone contracts, things like that. And professional development is doing things like taking online skill building courses. If students conduct enough professional development, they can actually get a raise at their job, and they get a permanent increase to their paychecks. We also have this designed so it balances where students really need to spend their time on different things in order to be successful in the game. For example, if a student wants to work extra hours constantly, they're trying to build up their net worth and neglecting their household chores, they're going to get penalized. Eventually, they're going to get an event that pops up that's saying that you have not been taking care of your household, you've got a huge cockroach infestation, and your landlord's giving a huge fine to pay for an exterminator. If they never spend time with their friends, they're going to lose opportunities to hang out with friends. So in the future, the benefits they get from socializing will be less than if they did it. So the game is balanced such that a student with a dominant strategy will be spending their time almost equally between these 4 options. They can lean a little bit harder on one or the other for a couple of months, but overall they're going to want to be somewhere near the middle. Of course, the students don't know that off the top of the head, and they have to kind of experience that as they're playing through the game and seeing that penalties do happen if you start neglecting one thing or another. In the game itself, there's a ton of settings. If you've used StockTrak before, you know there's dozens and dozens of settings for our investment simulation, and there are dozens and dozens of settings you can choose for your class budgeting game. The biggest one is game modes. You can have the game start out where your students are a college student with a part-time job, which means that they are balancing work life and studying. Studying takes the place on the weekends for professional development. And if you have your students studying a lot, when they actually graduate from their part-time job and enter the workforce, they do actually start with a higher starting salary because they spent more time in school studying. Another challenge in part-time mode is that you don't get a fixed paycheck. You get randomized hours because you're working a part-time job as a college student. So managing that variable income is a major challenge. They also have roommates and student-related expenses. Roommates means that most of their bills are considerably lower when they're a part-time student, but they also have things like they need to pay for school supplies, they get into conflicts with their roommates that need to be resolved, and that kind of thing. And in part-time mode, the student can graduate from school into the full-time workforce after a certain number of months of playing the game. So this is a great way to capture the transition period from being a student to being an actual worker. Understanding how budgets change, understand how spending changes, understanding how the entire paradigm of managing your finances changes. And of course the full-time mode, that's what I was just looking at there. Your class just starts as full-time workers who've just finished school. They balance their work life and professional development. They have regular hours at work, so they have consistent paychecks, but they have much higher expenses. Responding to the life events is a major challenge. They also have student loan payments and health insurance bills, which you can turn them off for your class, but they are another major expense that comes with the full-time mode that the part-time students wouldn't experience. And the emphasis on doing some sort of professional development is important. So spending your spare time making yourself more valuable means that your paychecks are going to be bigger in the long run of the game. And in the full-time mode, the decisions have a bigger long-term impact on quality of life. So for example, there's events in the cards that give you the option to buy a new car. If you buy a new car, it increases your car payment you have to make every month. And then it also, the students don't see it right away, but it also increases the car insurance payments they make every month. There's another event where they have the option to buy rental insurance. And it's not super cheap, so if they get it early in the game, they might not want to buy it. But that means later on in the game, when they have a break-in or they have a water leak, if they have rental insurance, the cost is covered, or is mostly covered. If they don't have rental insurance, it's just a huge new expense they have to deal with. So there's dozens and dozens of ways that every decision they make compounds over the course of the game. So just to give you a picture of what it looks like, this is the creation page for the budgeting game itself. Just like the stock game, you'd set the dates you want it to run from X to Y. The game scenario, are your students starting as a part-time student or just going straight into the workforce? If they are a part-time student, do you want them to just stay as a part-time student for the whole game, or do you want them to graduate and enter the workforce after a certain period of time? I personally recommend having the students start as a part-time student, manage the easy mode of the game for 6 months or so, then they graduate to the full-time workforce and need to manage that transition. I think that's where the most learning happens, is getting tripped up when that happens, right as they feel like they're getting used to things. The starting positions of your students, how much cash you want to give them their checking and savings account, how much money are they going to earn at their job, both their part-time job and their full-time job, because the wages you can set independently. What's the total income tax deducted from their paychecks? What are all the bills the students will get? So for example, this monthly rent bill, $250 because they have roommates as a part-time, it'll start at $700 when they're a full-time student. And if we look at the budget game itself, you can see the choice that you would make as the teacher would be this middle option, and this higher and lower option would be variable around that average. So these change, and there's an incentive for students to regularly try to find better deals for their rent and their cell phone contracts and things, but they're always going to be varying around the average that you set for the class. So just to make it a little bit more realistic for your specific geographic region. Car insurance payments, car payments, all the other kinds of bills that they would expect in the month. And then in the full-time mode, you can also set a student loan and health insurance payment. This is what we call the life event emphasis. So those events that pop up through the game are not completely random. You as the professor have some say on what happens. So you can turn on risk and insurance for one week of your class or so. And that means that there's going to be extra emphasis with more events coming with the risk and insurance bucket. Household chores, managing a household, doing light construction, do you hire a handyman or try to do it yourself, things like that. Reading contracts. So going through, if you turn this on, they're going to get a lot of things that come up where their landlord is saying something that may or may not be part of their rental agreement. And so they would need to actually look at their rental agreement and decide if that's true or not. And a lot of other varying events in that same type. So and then you can see quite clearly how this is actually going to play out for your students based on the settings you set. So, they're earning $1,400 a month. They can save. They have an average surplus or shortfall of $194. That means it's going to be realistic for students to hit that savings goal. The reason why we put this down here was because in our first testing classes, the teachers would go in here and try to set all these settings to be exactly realistic for what someone would pay in their area. They would set the hourly wage to minimum wage while they're a part-time student, and then the students would immediately go bankrupt because it just is not possible to actually hit those goals. They would need to get student loans or some other cash infusion that we don't handle in the game. So instead, you can see, I can balance this where the game is actually possible but difficult. So you'll want the surplus or shortfall to really be where the students are going to be working to hit their savings goals each month. Of course, if it's the first time using it, we highly recommend just using the default settings because we've balanced these out to work perfectly. If you want to increase your rent, you might need to decrease something else or increase the wage, things like that, just to make it so the game is possible. Which goes into how the rest of the budgeting game actually figures in with StockTrak. So now for a personal finance class using StockTrak, there's 3 major components that all work together. There's the budgeting game that I've been talking about here, our stock market simulation. If you've used StockTrak before, you know all about this, but we do have some special changes for a personal finance class. So when you're creating your class on StockTrak and you say you're doing a personal finance class, we actually kind of strip down the game a bit to make it a little bit easier for students to get into. We limit it to just U.S. equities. So U.S. equities, mutual funds, and bonds, So stocks, ETFs, mutual funds, and bonds just from the U.S. So it's something realistic that a personal working on their own personal finances can handle instead of getting into options and futures and things. And we also have a massively extended curriculum library. So we've been working with professors and teachers over the last 2 years and a bunch of financial professionals from the industry to develop our curriculum. There's a ton of lessons going into, let me pull up the page so you can see it here. We have over 60 personal finance lessons plus over 100 investing lessons that can work along with it. So articles on budgeting, mini games on using credit cards, and all of these are articles that finish with an assessment at the end of it. If you'd like a preview of the curriculum, I'd be happy to go through that. It takes a while just to go through everything that's in here, but basically if it's covered in a personal finance textbook, we cover it here. So if you're using a textbook already, this is an excellent supplement. If you are not using a textbook and you're just looking for something standalone, this also works very well because we intended it to be used in both cases. So if you already have a textbook, you'll probably use fewer of these as a supplement. If you don't have a textbook, you'll probably use more of them to cover more topics. For each of these lessons, you would choose whether or not you want to include it. For the assessment at the end of it, can the students retry it, or are you going to save their grade? If you've used the assignments on StockTrak before, this is going to look familiar, but we also added some important enhancements to this that impact how you can use this in a class, in particular a personal finance class. So for example, instead of just starts and end dates, we added prerequisites, so you can queue up assignments for your class. Example of this would be, during the first week of the class, you want your students to watch some tutorial videos. During the second week of class, you want them to start reading some of these articles on budgeting and saving and things like that, but you still want them to watch those tutorial videos first. So you can have that tutorial videos as a prerequisite to start the other curriculum. That is more useful when I talk about using it as kind of a university challenge, but it's also useful for an individual class to make sure the students are getting synced up in the way they should be. And the second piece is this reward here. you can say that when my student completes this assignment, I'm going to give them an extra $1,000 to their stock portfolio, or I'm going to give them an extra $200 to their budget game portfolio as an incentive to finish each assignment on time. So having these all work together means that there's quite a lot of combinations you can use to customize your class. We're working on some best practices document, but there's always the professor's creativity is going to be equal or greater than what we have because they're the ones standing in front of the students. And that gets into how you'd actually use it in a class. So this really is an essential tool for personal finance classes. When you couple our budgeting game with when you couple our new budgeting game with our existing stock game and the curriculum library, it really makes a complete experience. We've been testing this with some community colleges and advanced high schools for the last year just to see how it goes, and we've been getting excellent feedback. It really drives engagement in the classroom to a whole new level, and especially when you're looking for online resources because you may be limiting time on campus, it really is a missing link that brings everything together. And because the assignments and curriculum, you can link them together and do sequencing and prerequisites and rewards and all of those things. It gives the incentives for the students to be paying attention, doing it on time, and doing it consistently. So it all really works together very well for personal finance classes. And again, we're developing some new lesson plans just for that. But if you already have a personal finance class, we can work with you directly to talk about how the best ways to integrate it. The second option is campus-wide. So we've already had a lot of talks from our early testing teachers who wanted to use these for campus-wide personal finance initiatives. So they would couple the stock game with the budgeting game for a fully self-paced, gamified online learning experience. So an example of this would be the students start in the budgeting game. They are asked to, for the first 2 months, save up their first $1,000 in their emergency fund. After they finish those $1,000, then we credit their stock portfolio with $1,000 and they can start investing it. And then all while they're using both the stock game and the budgeting game, managing the portfolio of the money they'd already saved up, then they would have the curriculum library added on there, which gives them additional rewards, which impacts the rankings of the campus-wide challenge and really drives the engagement all the way through without necessarily having to do a bunch of in-person lectures and sessions. It works really well to be supplemented by those, of course, but it does give it a kind of a self-contained package that works really well for most types of programs that we've been talking to. And going along with that whole engagement and gamification side, we have added badges and achievements. So this applies to StockTrak at large as well as StockTrak with the budgeting game, where as students progress through both the stock game, the budget game, and the curriculum library, they now are earning badges signifying the achievements they've finished. Trading a certain number of stocks, completing a certain number of months in the budgeting game, buying a certain number of healthcare stocks, going through the tutorial videos, emphasizing studying while they're playing the game. All of these things can give different kinds of badges, and the students can show off these badges throughout on the rankings page, see the other badges other students have earned, and all kinds of other ways to really encourage exploration of the platform. And when you have everything turned on, it gives them a lot more push to explore it. So we've gotten a lot of really good feedback from the teachers who've looked at our badges so far and seen how they've done some testing with us in their classes, and we're still adding more of them. You can see some of these say coming soon. Our graphics team is still building them, and we're still building new achievements for students to earn, which is going to evolve, of course, over the course of the semester and the year as more and more students get into it and we see the full impact of how it's actually working in every class. And in terms of what's coming soon, we are working on even more enhancements to the budgeting game and the personal finance curriculum throughout the fall and the spring. Some of the two big things that we're looking at, the first one is we are trying to develop a certification where students who complete the personal finance curriculum, they complete the budgeting game, and they make some actions in the investing simulation to demonstrate their mastery of the subjects, will be able to earn a certain kind of certification. We're working with several partners to develop what this certification will actually look like, but it is something that we find is important and will hopefully be added by the end of the fall semester. The second is what we're calling the My Room concept, where as the students take actions in the budgeting game, they don't just disappear. We actually give them a room of their apartment that starts filling up with things that they've done throughout the game. As they buy things, they'll appear. As they upgrade the quality of their apartment, the apartment itself will improve. In this case, they've bought an aquarium, so there'll be an aquarium on it. The badges they have will show up here. And again, that just goes back to building that engagement, building that excitement behind it, and getting students to get a little bit more engaged than doing something because they're told to do it. So beyond that, it's just questions. So you can contact any of us at any time with any questions. My name's Kevin Smith. There's my email. Tom Reddy is also on the call. I think most of the people on this call have already worked with Tom at some point in the past. Anthony Ponzo works with both of us. He works mostly with, he's trying to reach out to more personal finance teachers to get them set up and talk about best practices. And we have our landing page at StockTrak.com/personalfinance. So do we have any questions?
Hello, yes. It's Richard Lewin. My first question was, obviously you've cut down the general StockTrak portfolio contest to a US-based only. So presumably all of the derivative products are off the table because we're thinking in terms of it simulating a sort of retirement plan. Is that right?
So basically yes, but at the same time, if your school has a site license, you can turn on and off anything you want at any time. We actually, because we don't have to have all the derivative markets involved in a personal finance class, there's fewer exchange fees on our end, and so we can discount it a bit. So compared to a normal StockTrak account, it's a little bit less expensive. But if you have a regular StockTrak account and you want to add the budgeting game to it, we can do that. It's just the way we have it.
I mean, what I was commenting was, the real world experience would be that you would have something like a 401, 403B or other plan, and there are legal constraints within what can be included in those. And it would seem to me that the way to go is to mimic that reality, because that way you're differentiating your StockTrak platform from a personal finance investment via somebody's retirement savings plan. And that to me is the way to go. My point being, you don't seem to have made a conscious differentiation between the two. I think you should, and I think you should create that module as to replicate as fully as possible what a real 401k or others, because there's not just 401ks. If you earn enough, as you know, there's 529s, there's savings plans for colleges and other things. And I think in terms of product development, that would be what I would want to see as a professor. I want to see, first of all, that rather than it being a cut down version of StockTrak, it is if you like, an entity that's designed to mimic a 401 or 403B plan or higher level plans. You could include even things like, college savings plans, other things in there. I think that would really add long term the value.
Yeah, so this is something that has always been one of the big questions we have when we're talking about the personal finance side, because we've been working with personal finance classes for years. And when we first talk to a teacher who's never used a stock simulation or a budget game before, this is one of the first things they say is, we want to start our class to look at some mutual funds, for example, because this is what most people would have in their actual retirement account. But when we actually work with the students, they have no idea what they're doing with the mutual fund. And so we usually start them out with stocks in a general play account to get them involved in just buying what you know, understanding what it means to make the first transactions. So I know what you're talking about, and I think we should have things like tax considerations put in and restrictions on the types of things that can happen in that portfolio. I'm not sure how we're going to do it yet, but yeah, it is something that we've talked about, we've had on our roadmap. It's just not something we have yet.
Because, you've got things like, obviously, with the current experience with COVID, you've got the fact that the government's changed the rules on loans that you can take from your retirement account. That can feed back into your personal finance goal. Because if you need to buy a new car or you had a medical emergency, that might be a route where someone really would resolve one of those problems using that. And it seems to me that that's the way to really make the gamification replicate the real life challenges.
Yeah, so when we have talked about that exact scenario, like in this case where we're talking about the stock game and the budget game don't actually feed into each other. Your stock portfolio, the professor chooses how much cash you have, and that is independent. Your budget game net worth is just in your savings account, you can't move it. But we have looked at ways to combine them. The tricky part is that we still want to have professors have the ability to change these things around. And, for example, use the stock game without starting the budget game right away. We have looked at, and it is on our product development side, where it's going to be more of a pre-packaged app almost, where it will be structured in that way, where you'll have one bucket of money, and then as you move into your retirement account, there's restrictions placed on it. You can't really withdraw it without taking loans and penalties. It's not at the top of our list, but it is something that's important that we're looking at.
Yeah, because I mean, the ultimate simulation would be a way to like fast forward through age groups so that you could play this game as a student, then as a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old, 70-year-old, and you could look at how these different choices in layers build on each other. And I mean, that would be a really accelerated learning way of students today, because it's impossible. How can you think 50 years ahead? But you could simulate 50 years ahead. And that would be an incredibly powerful teaching tool.
Yeah, so when we first started the development of the budget game, that is actually the direction that we were looking at, where it was going to be, you do the first bit of your life. You're a college student with your part-time job, and then you fast forward 5 years, and the decisions that you made impact your starting position for the next part of the game. The decision you make there impact the decision for the next part. And that still is something that we want to do, but it's going to be it's almost like a separate game from the budgeting game we have right now, which is really focusing on the day-to-day decisions and hitting your savings goals. So
yeah, no, I understand that, but my point to you is that you would create a virtual time machine.
Yeah.
And then you could truly educate students by taking them through the process and then giving them the opportunity to go back and make different decisions. Then you would really have rich learning outcomes, because students would realize that decisions today are going to have much longer impacts than they expected, and that their choices later will be affected by those decisions. And it would really add a layer of richness that I think would be, from an educational standpoint, incredibly valuable and very, very difficult for someone to do another way. And that, in a sense, is your moat, your unique selling point, your economic value added that StockTrak would provide, because you could be someone who pioneers that, and that would be immensely hard for somebody else to come into and try and, do the same as your business model. And so I see that. I think this is fascinating. I've not taught a personal finance class before. This is my first time of doing it, and I couldn't believe it when that link came along. It was just serendipity, where it said, "Do you want to listen to StockTrak doing a personal finance module?" And I had by accident about a couple of years ago, someone at StockTrak accidentally turned on the personal finance module in one of my classes, but I had two sections. So one section had it, one didn't, and I couldn't understand why students were complaining they had so much work to do in one class, and the others were saying this is a breeze. So when I looked into it and logged in and checked, I realized that one lot had every single personal finance possible thing they had to do, and it was a huge amount of work, and the others didn't. So I contacted you and got you to switch it on for both classes, and then I made them both sweat through it, and both classes were like, seriously, that was like 2 classes with work. And I said, yeah, but it's good for you, learning, if you don't feel the burn, you don't feel the learn, so it's good for you to do it. And if I hadn't seen that, I wouldn't have thought seriously about using this now. So in a way, even if that was a random mistake, I'm not saying you want to throw it out there randomly, but you might want to make sure that professors are aware of that content, because actually it was far better than I would have guessed it would have been. And I didn't realize how much there was there, because I just ticked the box. And I think for some reason, when I registered on one of the classes there, probably by fluke, there was that box that said personal finance. And I must have, because I tick everything, because I want my students to have the full run at it. And my view is the real world is challenging, and you need to be challenged because there's a lot of moving parts. And so I must have ticked that for one of the classes, and it made a huge impact. And by the way, that class thought that much of that content was very, very enriching to them. So thank you.
That's the best thing I can possibly get, because I was among the authors of that curriculum, so I'm happy to hear it. And this summer we just did a whole overhaul. We're working with some teachers and professors to do another update to it, to get it up to the new level, new tax laws and things like that. So I like the time machine concept. That was one of the 2 paths we were going to go down. It is something we are going to come back to. It's not something I'm going to have in the spring, but I'm hoping it's something we're going to have in the next year or 2.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the chartered financial planner or the certified financial planner qualifications and others, which potentially you could be supporting those type of professional qualifications as well with that. One of the biggest challenges a professional advisor has is that often their clients come to them late in the game. In other words, they've already made some of these decisions in the real world, which then limit the choices they have going forward. Whereas if you had a simulation whereby before your client even comes to you, you could run them through the scenarios and get them to play the game and learn, I think there's a tremendous industry application to what you're doing well beyond the academic field. that's really where I'm going with why I think the time machine concept could be something very unique that really changes the scale of the business you're in.
Well, then my next job is to make that happen.
Yeah, and by the way, it's not going to be easy because creating all these what ifs, particularly trying to mimic the real world, is in a very is in a much more greater layer of complexity by probably a multiple factor.
Oh yeah.
Versus doing a simulation. Having said which, you will get better and better and better, and your simulations will get richer and richer anyway. And there's almost an inevitability that you will want to replicate the real world as much as possible. And at some point, you will transit between being a student simulation to becoming a real world adaptable professional tool that can be used as a precursor to getting professional advice.
All right, so yeah, my background is economics and game theory, so I understand the mechanisms behind a lot of the simulations that you're talking about, and so I can already see in my mind's eye some of the formulas and mechanisms that would go into building it. So that's something I'm gonna have to look into over the next couple of months and talk with our development team and how we can implement.
Yeah, and I mean the more interactive, the more individual choices can have a ripple effect with other factors in the game, I think becomes more and more important as you were talking about the balance between, socializing and preparing your professional development, all those factors. I think that's where a lot of richness comes in because, everyone's life has a myriad of choices and students need to understand that those choices are not one-dimensional. They hit multiple facets. And I think that's what makes it very interesting from what you were saying, things like you've got to create your emergency fund first. Well, we know that from planning. I mean, if you haven't got an emergency fund, then, life's going to throw curveballs at you and you're going to have to be able to deal with it. And certainly when you buy a house or have children, other factors, and these would be much richer complications to your model. These would be very interesting things to simulate.
I agree. So I will work on that, and I will keep you in the loop as we move forward with that. Do we have any other questions from the audience? If not, I am going to close the recording. I'm going to be sending this out. We only have a few people actually in attendance, but we had a pretty large outpouring of professors who were asking us for the recording of this, so I'll be sending that out later today once I have it fully uploaded. Otherwise, thank you for joining me. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you are in the world.
And Kevin, can I just ask one last thing? If we want to go in and do a trial on one of these to actually see how it works, both as a student, also how we can play with the combination of decisions that we'll have to make as to how to set up the game, have you got either a walkthrough for us to do that or an ability for us to spend a day or two, testing out the sim?
So this was our sneak peek, quote unquote. What I showed you here was our testing site where it's not actually available for use yet. The actual launch where we'll have that available is going to be and we're targeting September 1st. Hopefully it'll be a little bit earlier. Otherwise, you can reach out to me or Anthony and we'll do a kind of a walkthrough demo with you and kind of show you where the pieces are. What school are you with?
Sorry, I switched my mic off. Rollins College.
Okay, Rollins College. I don't think. Yeah, you get. I don't think.
I've used your product for 12 years or so. This will be year 13, I think. Yeah.
So we'll be happy to set you up for the trial as soon as I have it available, basically.
Yeah, wonderful. And please feel free to reach out because I'm going to use this. I want to adapt it, and I want to help you and give you the best feedback possible because I've noticed your product has developed through the richness of resources that different professors have added to the equation. So I think it's my job to give you some good feedback as well.
Excellent. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Richard. Nice to hear your voice, and welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. I know we missed you at the AF this year, so I know that we've had a lot of challenges, but we appreciate the incredible work you've done in supporting us all these years, and it's good for us to roll up our sleeves and give you some great positive feedback. This is a wonderful step forward as far as I can see for StockTrak, and I think you've got some incredible longer journeys that you could play with this. Well done.
Thank you, Richard. Of course, we miss the conferences. We miss you. And we hope to get back to some sense of normalcy in 2021, God willing.
Thank you.
All right, so that is it for me, and I'm going to stop the recording now, and I will hopefully will see your classes come in on StockTrak shortly.